The night my daughter walked through that door, shaking like a leaf in a nor'easter, I was elbow deep in leftover casserole and halfway through a glass of wine I didn't earn. I almost missed it, the trembling. I almost looked away. That's the thing nobody tells you about the worst moments of your life. They don't announce themselves with sirens. They arrive disguised as a Tuesday. Vesper was 11, old enough to ride the commuter train to my parents' house in Dunhallow by herself, and she'd done it a dozen times since the custody arrangement resettled everything like sediment after a flood. My parents, Rosalind and Cornelius Merrick, lived 40 minutes east in a house that smelled of cedar and old grievances. The visit was supposed to be routine. Drop off Friday, pick up Sunday. 2 nights of board games and Rosalind's overworked cabbage soup. I had no reason to expect anything other than a tired girl with a backpack full of dirty laundry. What I got instead was a child holding a box wrapped in brown paper and silver ribbon, with both arms extended like she was carrying something radioactive. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She hadn't taken her coat off. "Grandma said to give you this," she whispered. I set down my fork. "What is it?" She said, Vesper's voice cracked in that specific way that children's voices crack when they've been rehearsing something terrible. "She said to tell you not to overreact." The room went very still. Not the peaceful kind of still, the kind that happens in the second between lightning and thunder, when every living thing understands that impact is coming. "Did she say anything else?" Vesper finally looked up at me. Her eyes were wet at the edges, not quite crying, but close enough that the wine glass meant nothing anymore. "She said Grandpa Cornelius doesn't know she's sending it. She said that's important." I took the box. It was lighter than I expected. Whatever was inside shifted when I tilted it. Something loose, something small. The ribbon was tied with the kind of excessive knot Rosalind always used, triple looped, the way she tied everything as though the world would unravel if she didn't cinch it hard enough. I thought about that knot later, when I understood what it meant for her to have tied it at all. It meant she'd deliberated. It meant she'd wrapped it carefully, chosen the silver ribbon from her craft drawer, smoothed the brown paper, and folded the corners with crisp intention. She'd wanted me to know it was deliberate. "Go upstairs," I told Vesper. "Homework, then shower." "Mom!" "Please, baby." She went. I waited until I heard her footsteps reach the landing before I peeled back the paper. Inside was a shoebox. Not new, old, the kind with a lid that fits too loosely because the cardboard has softened over decades. On the top, in Rosalind's handwriting, the same cramped cursive she used to label my school lunches. For Navka, only Navka. I lifted the lid. I don't know exactly what I expected. A letter, a piece of jewelry, something sentimental and slightly passive-aggressive, the way Rosalind's gifts usually were. A framed photo from a birthday I looked bad in, a recipe clipped from a magazine that implied I didn't cook well enough. I was not prepared for what was actually inside. There were photographs, old ones, printed on the thick, glossy paper of the 90s, the kind with the white border and the date stamped in orange on the bottom corner. And there were documents, folded pages, some handwritten, some typed on paper so thin it had yellowed at the creases. A sealed envelope with my name on the front that had already been opened and resealed badly, the flap sitting crooked. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of velvet cloth, something small and metallic that caught the kitchen light. My hand stopped working properly. I sat down on the floor. I didn't choose to, my knees decided for me. The photographs were of a man I didn't recognize. He was young in most of them, maybe 20, 25, with dark hair and the kind of jaw that belongs in old war films. In several of the pictures, he was standing with my mother, a young Rosalind, narrow-shouldered and laughing in a way I had never personally witnessed. In one, she was looking at him the way you only look at one person in your life, if you're lucky, if the timing doesn't destroy you. In the last photograph, she was holding a baby, and my name, Navka, was written on the back in her handwriting with a year. The year I was born. I called the police at 9:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I screenshot the call log afterward, needing evidence that the next 4 hours had actually happened. The dispatcher asked me what my emergency was, and I said, and I remember this precisely, I don't know if this is a crime or a coincidence, but I need someone to help me figure out which one it is." There was a pause. She sent Officer Drevich. He arrived in 11 minutes, which felt both too fast and catastrophically slow. Drevich was the kind of officer who looks like he's seen enough that nothing surprises him, and yet he still managed to raise both eyebrows when I spread the contents of the shoebox across my kitchen table. He picked up each photograph with careful fingers, turned the documents over, read the typed pages slowly. He asked me twice to confirm my parents' names and address. "This man," he said, pointing to the dark-haired stranger in the photographs, "you don't know him. I've never seen him in my life. And the documents," he tapped the folded pages, "you've read these?" "Most of them." "Then you understand why you called." "I understand why I called." He was on his radio within minutes. I heard him use words I didn't expect from a welfare check: potential fraud, identity documents, secondary next of kin. He asked his dispatcher to run a name. The name on the documents. A name I had read 3 times already, pressing each syllable into my memory like pressing a bruise to confirm it still hurts. Aldrich Szabo. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, turning the velvet-wrapped object over in my hands without unwrapping it, when the second car pulled into my driveway. Not a police car, a civilian vehicle, dark blue, parked at an angle like the driver was in a hurry or hadn't fully decided to be here yet. I watched through the window. A man got out. He stood beside the car for a moment, looking at my house with his hands in his pockets, and even through the glass and the dark and the distance, something about his stillness felt familiar in the way that a word feels familiar before you remember what it means. Drevich opened my front door before the man knocked. They spoke on the porch, low voices. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the shape of the conversation. Drevich surprised, then deferential, then stepping aside. The man came in. He was 60, maybe 62. The dark hair from the photographs had gone silver gray, but the jaw was the same. He wore a coat that was too light for the temperature, and his eyes, when they landed on me, were the same shade of brown I'd seen in my own mirror every morning for 34 years without ever thinking to ask where it came from. He said my name, Navka, not a question. I noticed things in the seconds before I responded. The way he held his weight slightly forward, like a man who had rehearsed walking through that door so many times in his mind that the actual doing of it was slightly ahead of his body. The way his coat, charcoal, single-breasted, a button missing from the second hole, had been pressed recently but not tonight. The way he looked at me with the particular attention of someone who has been studying a photograph for years and is now reconciling it with the 3-dimensional fact of a person. I noticed all of it because noticing is what I do when I'm terrified and don't want to show it. I had inherited that from Rosalind, I realized. The way she could arrange her face into perfect neutrality while her inner world was flooding. "Who are you?" I said, which was a lie by omission because part of me had already assembled the answer from the photographs and the documents and the velvet-wrapped secret and the way Rosalind's handwriting had trembled almost imperceptibly on the envelope. "My name is Aldrich," he said. "I knew your mother a long time ago, before you were born, before she married Cornelius." The velvet cloth unrolled in my hands. The metallic object fell onto the table with a small, clear sound. A ring. Old gold, with a stone I couldn't identify in the kitchen light, set in a style that belonged to a different era entirely. "She kept it," he said quietly. He wasn't surprised, he almost looked relieved. That was the moment I heard the front door open again. My husband, Theron, was supposed to be in Carrick on a work trip. He had texted me from the hotel bar at 7 o'clock. Room service and bad television, don't wait up. But here he was, still in his travel clothes, stopping in the doorway with his roller bag still in his hand. He took in the room the way you take in an accident, scanning for the severity before you commit to reacting. His eyes moved from Drevich to the shoebox to me to Aldrich, and the color left his face. Not gradually, all at once, like a switch. "What is he doing here?" Theron said. Not who is he, not what's happening, not are you okay, what is he doing here? The room rearranged itself around that question. Every conversation I'd had with Theron in 11 years of marriage ran briefly through my mind like a film on fast forward. And I was looking for a frame I'd missed, a scene that explained why my husband, who was supposed to be 40 miles away, had just walked into my kitchen and recognized a man I had never met. "You two know each other," I said. It wasn't a question either. Theron set down his roller bag. Slowly. The deliberateness of it told me he was buying time to construct something. I'd seen him do it before in arguments, reach for the careful version of a story before the true one escaped him. "We've met," he said. Aldrich said nothing. He was watching Theron with an expression I couldn't read, not hostile, not warm, measuring. The expression of a man deciding how much truth the room could hold. "How?" I asked Theron. "Navka, let me explain." "That's what I'm asking you to do." Drevich had gone very quiet in the corner. Professional stillness. He was recording this, I realized, or at least memorizing it. Theron exhaled. He sat down across from me, not beside me. I noted the distance. "Aldrich contacted me about 6 months ago," he said. "He found me through," a pause, "through some research he'd done. He knew who you were. He knew we were married." "What kind of research?" "The kind that you do when you're trying to find out if someone is still alive and whether they're safe." Theron looked at Aldrich when he said it, not at me. An accusation wearing the skin of an explanation. Aldrich's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I asked him not to tell you, not yet. I wanted to approach Rosalind first. I wanted her to have the choice. The choice to tell me what," I said. And here's where the story splits from everything I thought I knew about my own life. Cornelius Merrick is not my biological father. Rosalind had been engaged to Aldrich Szabo in 1989, a private arrangement that her own parents had opposed with the kind of quiet ferocity that wealthy provincial families specialize in. When the engagement ended is a polite word, demolished is more accurate, she was already pregnant. She married Cornelius 7 months later. Cornelius, who was steady and employed, and from a family her parents approved of. Cornelius, who adopted me without ever being told there was anything to adopt. Or so Aldrich believed. The documents in the shoebox told a different story. Rosalind had told Cornelius the truth before they married. She had made him promise. And Cornelius, stoic, undemonstrative Cornelius, who had coached my youth football team and taught me to drive and walked me down the aisle, had kept that promise for 34 years, had kept it so well that he'd become something truer than biology. He had become my father by sheer accumulation of ordinary days. And Rosalind had kept the photographs, had kept the ring, had kept the documents that proved that somewhere in the world there was a man named Aldrich Szabo who didn't know if his daughter was alive or happy or even real. She had sent the box when Aldrich contacted Theron, sent it because she understood the secret had legs now, and she wanted me to hear it from her hands rather than from a stranger's. That was the most Rosalind thing she had ever done, not saying it aloud, saying it wrapped in brown paper and silver ribbon, with a warning not to overreact. Officer Drevich left at midnight after taking a brief statement from all three of us. He confirmed there was no crime, only a family making the choices that families make when silence becomes its own kind of violence. He was kind about it, in a brusque way. Theron and I didn't speak until Aldrich had gone, left with the ring, because it had been his mother's and Rosalind had kept it only as evidence, as documentation that the thing had been real. He shook my hand at the door. He told me he didn't expect anything from me. He said he'd been looking for me for 3 years, and that knowing I existed and was intact and had a daughter of my own was sufficient. He said it like he meant it, and I believed him the way you believe something that hasn't had time to complicate yet. What Theron and I said to each other after the door closed, I'll keep that. There are things that belong inside a marriage that lose their meaning the moment they meet open air. What matters is that I understood, finally, why he'd come home early. He'd gotten a message from Aldrich earlier that evening. She knows. Be there. And Theron, who had been sitting on this for 6 months and hating the weight of it, had left the hotel bar and driven 40 miles to be in the room when the world shifted under my feet. That's not nothing. I went upstairs. Vesper was asleep with her lamp still on and a book folded open across her chest, the way she always slept when she'd fought sleep long enough. I moved the book. I turned off the lamp. I stood in the dark of her room for a long time, thinking about all the things we inherit without knowing we're inheriting them. Jaw shapes and eye colors, and the particular way Vesper tilts her head when she's listening, which I'd always attributed to me, which I now understood came from somewhere further back and stranger than I'd known. In the morning, I called Rosalind. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. We talked for 47 minutes. I didn't say everything I wanted to say, and she didn't say everything she needed to. But what passed between us was enough to begin something that had been waiting decades for permission to start. I didn't call Cornelius, not yet. That call required a different kind of preparation, a longer walk toward it. What I did was this. I made Vesper's breakfast. I sat across from her while she ate, and I watched her hands around her spoon. My hands, Aldrich's hands, the unbroken chain of a gesture that had traveled through decades and secrets and silver ribbon to land here, in a Tuesday morning, unremarkable and irreplaceable. "Mom," Vesper said, looking up, "are you okay?" "I think I'm going to be," I told her, and that might have been the first entirely honest thing I'd said in 11 years. If this story reached something in you, hit like. It keeps these voices alive. Subscribe and don't miss what comes next.